you all today. We've been following, the digital workplace really for the last 10 years. We were kind of an early adopter of that whole concept, and it really became evident early on that employee experience was going to be central to any successful digital workplace effort, much the same way that customer experience and customer digital experience really is at the center of external digital marketing engagement. So what we've done today is we're releasing what we call the MPEX 200, or the Employee Experience 200 Key Solutions, as part of a super graphic, and I'm going to show you that. And it's useful as a graphic, but also it helps you then sort of have deeper conversations within your own enterprise around just how these tools break out. What does your stack look like? So we'll be breaking down the categories, rethinking kind of employee experience, and then talking about the new digital workplace stack and what does that mean in terms of what's in and what's out. So it's going to be a very rapid fire half hour. Again, welcome your questions or comments or anything that you disagree with in the Go to Meetings tab, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end to address those. Okay, here is the MPEX 200. So we've organized vendors into different categories here. You can download this high-res version of this at the URL below that you see, realstorygroup.com/MPEX. And the point here is that this is not the total universe of all the different players, but these are the ones that we consider to be the most important across 3 different categories: collaboration and communication, employee self-service, and then human capital management and HR technology, as well as major lines of business. So I'm going to talk about these in a minute, but the point is that these are where employees are spending the vast majority of their time. So in a sense, these are the vendors that are supplying the employee experience. And so the question then that we have to ask is this the right experience? Are these the most effective experiences that we could be having in terms of making people more effective and more recognized in their work? And so part of that is obviously just operationally, what are you doing and how are you deploying these tools? And part of this is, do you have the right tools to make your employees successful? So let's look at these different categories in turn. But first, a little bit of background. So there's 200 products. Some come from the same vendor. So there's a total of 135 unique vendors on this. So that means that, as you can imagine, there's also a lot of overlap. You've got vendors like IBM and SAP that compete across a number of these different categories, either with a kind of a suite, or in many cases a conglomeration of different tools. And that whole notion of single vendor versus best of breed always been an issue in digital. We're going to come back to that at the end here as well. So let's break down the different categories here, starting with collaboration and communication. This is the biggest one, and that's not by accident. It's also the one where I spend the most time on, and there's a particular reason for this. There's strong evidence from both IDC, Pew, and others that knowledge workers spend about 60% of their time here in this green category. So 60% of their time in front of a screen is using these sorts of tools. So this tells us a lot of things. Among other things, you've got to get this right? This is kind of table stakes in your digital workplace, is that if you are having disconnects here or poor employee experiences, tools that are preventing them from being their best in the digital workplace, then that's going to cause significant problems in efficiency and lack of engagement as well. So this is something, like I say, it's table stakes. You've got to get this right. And let's look at some key trends here. So first, what we're seeing is smarter groupware, and groupware is probably the area where you're just going to see the most cognitive and AI and bots, that whole sort of cluster of tools coming into play here as key features. And we're going to have some research coming out later this month around that. But I think the trend definitely is towards smarter groupware. People certainly feeling overwhelmed by email and other sorts of messaging, and a lot of opportunities there around automation. We're going to see a lot more embedded unified communication. So being able to chat, do instant messages, video conferencing right from within applications. And this whole notion of embedding really is kind of a macro theme across this whole landscape. Similarly, this notion of integrated social collaboration. So rather than social silos, seeing more in terms of integrating social and into collaboration, actual applications around task management, around getting stuff done. and also integrating social and collaboration into other spaces. And part of the rise of this then is more contextual project-oriented chats and task management, the so-called Slack effect. The reason why Slack has been so popular and has inspired so many imitators, including from among Google, Microsoft, and IBM, is because it solves a really important problem around team communication. And so what all this means then is kind of a shrinking space for the traditional intranet, which was a kind of a read-only publishing platform. Now, information is still critical. We still need to share knowledge. It's just that this is happening more in terms of these applications rather than a traditional sort of intranet. So the next level is self-service. Obviously, critical feature, set of features and capacities that employees have come to expect. We're still seeing, this has been around, this concept of digital employee self-service has been around for more than 20 years, but we're still seeing some lingering obstructions here, particularly around underinvestment in identity and access management. And if you don't get that right, it's very difficult to do a lot of these things, but self-service in particular. Again, we're seeing many of these capabilities get embedded into other applications, including things like learning, expense management, and other things being embedded into other applications rather than being standalone places. This is the area where mobile enablement is so important, but our own data suggests that there's big lags here. This is probably the one category, the purple space, where we've seen at some levels, in some cases, the least mobile enablement, and it's the source of great frustration. The other trend that we're seeing is around, the traditional so-called enterprise portal, typically a very heavyweight environment. We're starting to see more lightweight portals and integration spaces as a new trend around mashups and no-code portals. A lot of interesting things happening there. So the concept of portals isn't going away. It's just that some of the heavyweight infrastructure behind it is. And then, of course, opening up the enterprise here to allow people from outside the enterprise to be able to interact with you, not just in terms of collaboration, but also in terms of access to some of this tooling. Then we get to human capital management, as well as other major lines of business. So if you're in marketing, maybe you spend all day in something like Marketo. If you're a salesperson, maybe you're spending all day in Salesforce. And if you're in accounts receivable, maybe you're spending most of your time in SAP or Oracle or some other financial package. And so obviously it's important to get this right as well. This is where we often find that employees are maybe most beholden to the vendor, because many of these tools can be very difficult to modify. These vendors historically have not sold into the business, and so very often their interfaces are not the best. So it's important to work on this and get this right as well. There's a lot of interesting case studies out there about applying UX to this blue space here. But there's a number of kind of macro trends that are important to look at. First is more an emphasis on really going all the way in terms of more extreme HR self-service, putting more and more capabilities in the hands of your employees, and then really re-emphasizing the HR team less around case management and supporting transactions and more towards employee engagement. And we really believe that there's a key leadership space for HR. They're often responsible for the broader employee experience. There's no reason why they can't be responsible for employee digital experience, or at least to take an important lead role. This historically has not been an easy place for HR to inhabit, but there's a lot of interesting trends and models emerging out there that we can talk about later if you're interested. The other trend here is, of course, embedding other helper services into line of business applications, so that if I already use Skype for instant messaging and video chat, voice chat, that maybe I can embed Skype into some of my other lines of business where I'm living all day long. Still a long way to go here. It's clearly an employee desire. And similarly, we're seeing a trend here towards collaboration within these applications as opposed to going to a separate collaboration space. This has been a little bit of a challenge because to the extent that collaboration is not a layer in your enterprise, then you end up having all of these different sort of collaboration spaces. I'm collaborating in SAP, then I'm collaborating separately within Salesforce Chatter, and then I'm collaborating separately maybe with Jive. so on and so forth, then collaborating separately in Workday. And so all of a sudden, I'm kind of collaborating in a lot of different places. So architecturally, clearly, the future is going to be more around services-oriented collaboration that I can inject into these different places. But right now, we're seeing these vendors kind of in the absence of that, providing a lot of their own collaboration services, for better or worse. So from an enterprise perspective, if I look at this historically, we've tended to model the digital workplace in terms of a traditional kind of enterprise architecture layer cake diagram. And this is important. You need to understand this. You need to have this. You need to be able to audit your systems and understand how they relate together through diagrams like this. What's missing here, though, unfortunately, is the employee, right? This is the enterprise view of itself. So the enterprise view of itself is important, but what digital really does is reverse the sort of power equation. What digital says is that the user actually comes first, and that you work from the screen backwards rather than from the enterprise forward. And so there's a model here that we can take from the external digital world, in other words, the MarTech world, of external engagement that says that the customer is at the center. And so you have reference models like this that we've developed, where you have the customer at the center. There's certain things they want to do around discovering, transacting, belonging. There's a whole set of journeys that you need to provide from a business context. You need to elaborate those journeys in blue from out of these business platforms in gray, and then all supported by enterprise services in purple. So there's a series of layers here around what you're trying to do, but at the everything centers on the customer and the customer journey, right? So this is a very well understood concept in customer-oriented digital. Every enterprise is working towards this, has been working towards this for some time. And what this does is give us a model then for thinking about employee digital. So if we think about an employee-centered digital workplace, then employees have journeys as well. They have aspirations, certainly. They have work they need to done either individually or collectively or in terms of self-improvement. And those journeys typically then get manifested through specific applications. So in the blue here, these are business applications that really, I would argue, the business needs to own, even though they may be based on business platforms in the gray that are potentially installed and managed by IT. Then, of course, there's a whole set of supporting services as an enterprise that you see in the purple. So this is an employee-centered digital workplace reference model. We've been using this with a number of subscribers in a variety of different ways. One interesting way is to do some audits where we've done some stoplight analysis, but also looking at where are their gaps and where should this drive in terms of a roadmap based on the employee journeys that we're trying to support. Because you can't necessarily do all of this well at one time. You can't get to green on all this stuff in 1 year, so you have to sort of figure out, okay, what are the areas that are the real pressure points in my enterprise, and this is where I'm going to be making investments. But what this also means is that the employee-centered digital workplace calls the question really on user experience. So this is where we tie in employee experience in the digital workplace, is that if you care about an employee-centric digital workplace, then you need to take an outside-in approach from screens to systems rather than systems to screens. And the good news is that you can borrow user experience methodologies from the public web in terms of journeys and top tasks, contextual inquiries, and actual journey development, right? And so then this is a new role for what used to be the internet team, what is now hopefully a digital workplace team, which is as a UX advocate for all applications, right? Across those three categories that we have. So we're not just focused on the intranet or collaboration, we are the UX advocate. And so we have to figure out where are their blockages, where are their opportunities, and from a user experience standpoint, go at that. And that may require us finding new or different vendors, but it may also mean simply modifying the experiences and the tools we already have. So the focus here then becomes on applications, right? Specific applications, business applications, rather than websites, team sites, features, news, content. It's not that news and content are unimportant, but that they're not necessarily applications in their own right. And so you want to start thinking in terms of applications that are going to make people more effective and more recognized for their effectiveness. And what's also happening here, though, is a kind of a stack explosion. And so this is both a challenge, but also an opportunity for you. So I borrowed this from Chief Martech, where he talked about the Cambrian Explosion in marketing tools, where he first started covering them in 2011. He charted 150, and now he's up to 5,000. So this is incredible growth in the MarTech landscape. And I think that it's an open question. Are we seeing a similar, what Scott Brinker calls a Cambrian explosion on the digital workplace side? I think the answer is yes, that we're seeing more purpose-built tools like Slack and like others, certainly simpler versions of for things like CRM and ERP as well. Also more employee self-provisioning or departmental self-provisioning, whether we like it or not. This is something where business people are often able to go and license these tools themselves. I think what's going to limit some of the experimentation here is that there are challenges around context switching. So if an employee has to work with 12 different applications to get her job done, yeah, they may be purpose-built, but that's also a little bit of a challenge for her, particularly in a mobile environment. And at the end of the day, there's probably fewer resources in your enterprise for experimentation here than you are in terms of satisfying customer journeys. But our answer is still going to be that, yes, we're going to say yes, that I think we're seeing a kind of an MPEX technology explosion where we're going to see more and different tools, some of them plugging into the larger vendors, some of them challenging some of the larger vendors. And so, there's a looming kind of slow motion showdown that's going here. Historically, you've had these platforms who want to essentially own the employee digital experience or be the, capo di capi of this whole space. And the reality is that at some level, we're seeing their footprint shrinking. We're certainly seeing a number of different applications that you see here in the middle who are really wanting to increase their share of the employee experience, are continue to challenge some of the bigger players with very specific sorts of applications that will draw you away from things like Office or G Suite or your SAP Suite. But then I think where the real Cambrian explosion is happening is over on the right in terms of these niche platforms, many of which are trying to disrupt the enterprise, many of which are successfully doing so. And this is where a lot of the interesting innovation is, of course, happening, where much of the employee self-provisioning is happening. And it's important to keep an eye out for these because this is where you can make significant improvements in employee experience in a way that you might not be able to, for example, with the SAP stack or with the Oracle stack. So what this means in terms of your MPEX future is, again, less of a focus on sort of intranets and team sites. Not that those should necessarily go away, but that you want to take more of a focus on the broader digital workplace. And so that means that instead of thinking about redesigns, you're going to have more of a UX-driven sort of product-oriented roadmap that's driven towards employee effectiveness and recognition. Less around social collaboration silos or social as a destination, more around embedding these services into other applications. Again, the vendors aren't totally there yet, but we're definitely seeing a trend and certainly an aspiration. Less emphasis on systems consolidation, although sometimes it's important, and more around experimenting with some of these disruptive players. And what this means is not so much orbiting a single platform that we're just going to say, okay, Office 365 is the basis of our digital workplace, but more building a flexible stack that may have a number of large players, but also a number of separate applications. And so what this means is spending less time on customizing, and certainly those of you who are in the process of escaping SharePoint on-prem can appreciate this. Less effort and emphasis on customizing some of these platforms with the possible exception of modifying the overall UX layer, and more focus on integration, right? That if I'm going to have all these tools, then I want to have seamless paths between them for my employees. And at the end of the day, ultimately thinking less about a collection of applications and more of a collection of services, particularly opportunities around microservices in the cloud here. Again, that's more down the road. And some of the vendors are fighting this because, of course, they want to have a greater share of employee experience. So they want to tend to aggregate a number of things themselves in their own platforms. But certainly, I think people who are really thoughtful about this are really pushing in terms of a collection of services that can be injected into different applications. But the key thing here is that in the old days, these were all enterprise driven. In the future, the whole mindset needs to be employee centric. And if you're employee-centric, then you have to ask yourself a whole number of things that we'll certainly be getting into the coming months, and others can talk to you about around operational effectiveness, skill sets, and other sorts of things. But you also have to ask yourself, do we have the right tool? And so again, I'll share with you this chart, and you're free to download this graphic and share it as you see fit. You can find it again at realstoregroup.com/MPEX. So again, some handy links. You can also get a free sample of any of our research at realstoregroup.com/excerpt, and you can check out the different samples of different vendors that we evaluate. You'll find that our critiques are generally known as the toughest in the industry, but you can go try it out yourself and decide yourself. So Scott will talk about next step. We've got a number of questions here. I'm going to just take a quick look at those. So Scott, if you just spend a minute here, and then we'll get to the questions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. And again, we certainly encourage you to head towards our website to download both the vendor map as well as the MPEX 200 that Tony mentioned. And if you want to take a closer look at what's a subscriber experience like, please feel free to email us at the address listed there, explore@realstorygroup.com. We'd be happy to walk you through what's available to our subscribers when it comes to creating a customized shortlist, comparing vendors side by side, or just getting a general sense of what our research entails and what will be available to you as a Real Story Group customer. One other item of note I did want to mention is that we do have a couple of other interesting research briefings coming up in June. Next Wednesday at this time, we'll be looking at the right way to select digital asset management technology. And in the following week, we'll take a look at selecting web content management technology. So if you're thinking about potentially divorcing from your current vendor, or just getting a better sense of the marketplace, we certainly welcome you to join us for those upcoming presentations. Tony, looks like there are a couple questions there to take a look at.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So Niels is asking, where does email fit into this picture, given that it's still the dominant communications medium for business and widely viewed as the problem? You're right, it is widely viewed as the problem. I think sometimes unfairly. I think it's more our communications patterns that are the real problem, and email is just sort of the a little bit the gets kind of beaten up over this. But Niels, we put email under groupware, so the general category of groupware. We should probably just relabel it groupware and email. So obviously the big players there, Microsoft, IBM, Google, to a lesser extent Oracle, and others like Zimbra. So email, obviously a really big piece of this. One hopes that in the future email becomes more of a messaging and signaling platform and less as a sort of content delivery platform where it has a content payload, and instead the content is all in the context of these different applications that help you get work done. So the other question is around user experience and usability. Huge problem for digital workplace. Are these vendors, who do you think really gets it and is truly investing in usability? Well, the funny thing about that is that all the vendors think that they're investing in usability, but it's interesting that they have sort of different ideas about what that means. I mean, if we define usability as fitness to purpose, then even if you have a really slick UX, which Google is often famous for, if they're not actually very purposeful in terms of helping people get their work done and also satisfying enterprise concerns, then I question the usability there. So in general, the larger the vendor, often the bigger the challenge here, partly because they also have these legacy customers and it's very difficult to get them into modern UX paradigms. So that was one of the reasons why Microsoft went to the cloud, was to do a complete reset. And now it seems like they're doing resets monthly, which just goes to show you that they're doing a lot of experimentation. Some of it's working, some of it's not. And when you make a system like that then the cornerstone of your digital workplace, you are to some extent, handing off that responsibility, and you have to evaluate, is this vendor actually good at this or not? Michael's asking, where does a solution like Acumen fit into the MPEX 200 list? So, Acumen has changed a little bit over the years. I see it as one of many sort of SharePoint, Office 365 add-ons, that's an effective place to be for those many enterprises who have invested substantially in SharePoint and or Office 365 and find it's coming up short in one way or another, rather than trying to fix it themselves. Going to a third-party vendor to supplement or complement what Microsoft is doing is often a very intelligent move. In terms of what Acumatica specifically does, I'm not necessarily too sanguine about that. We should be building WCM, Web Content Experience Management systems, off of the SharePoint repository. I just don't think it's really designed for that. But the whole notion of SharePoint add-ons is useful. I think what we look at here is what we're organizing with this MPEX 200 is not necessarily saying, okay, where are SharePoint add-ons, but it's more, what are the capabilities that an enterprise actually needs, regardless of platforms. It's certainly one of the capabilities in digital workplace is web publishing, but I would say that that's a shrinking capability. Not because publishing is unimportant and content is unimportant. Content is terribly important. Content is the lifeblood of communities and collaboration and interaction. But what's more important is less around publishing content in a kind of a traditional internet standpoint, and more around putting content in the context of applications that help people get their jobs done. What are some, Irma's asking, what are some good basic economical tech solutions for knowledge management and community practice? Well, you'll need to check out our research. I mean, I think that it's a tricky one because I think basic and knowledge management and basic and community practice haven't always gone together. Those have tended to be higher end tools with very specific applications in mind. You know, we've certainly seen people use small, medium-sized business type solutions. And we've got a few on our MTech chart if you want to take a look at that around collaboration. Certainly people have kind of used Google Apps and now G Suite to do, but unfortunately there aren't specific, not KM and communities of practice applications there. But there's an interesting, and I think this is a space really to watch in the next several years as more and more small, medium-sized businesses become digital first themselves. They're going to be looking for these sorts of sophisticated applications, but they're not going to want to license a jive. So I'm not sure it's a great answer today, or I think that in the next year or two, you're going to, as part of this broader Cambrian explosion, you're going to see a lot more simpler, lower end tools addressing these sorts of concerns. Maurice is asking, it seems like Slack is becoming a platform to build apps on top of. What do you think of this trend? I think it's a very healthy trend. You know, I think that I'm more excited, I think, about some of the integration of Slack into other tools that allow you to get things done within Slack and in terms of managing files and other sorts of things without doing a lot of context switching. So I'm less sanguine about Slack as a kind of a development platform. That feels a little bit like a reach, but I am more sanguine about Slack having an open API and being able to integrate seamlessly with other solutions. I think they're really setting the bar there. And this is a great example of how we can have a more services-oriented digital workplace going forward. So Maurice, thank you for that question. And with that, we've come a little bit past the half hour, but always a pleasure meeting with you. If there's any way that Real Story Group can make you more successful, you know, we've helped more than 3,000 global enterprises over the last 10 years, and certainly would welcome leveraging our research to make you and your initiatives more successful going forward. So for Real Story Group, this is Tony Byrne, thanking you for joining us today and signing out. See you next time. Bye now.